So a very warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining Dr. Christoph Gornott and myself, Brendan O'Flaherty, for today's webinar. Today's webinar will explore the use of technology in understanding yield losses caused by climate change. So it's the third new and established a unique opportunity throughout October and November to learn, interact, and ask questions from a panel of industry experts. So just before I formally introduce Dr. Christoph, it's also important that I mention Horizon 2020, whose funding allows Oasis Hub to create this wonderful webinar series for our community. So a big thank you to them. So we are grateful for today's panel, who are Dr. Christoph Gornott, an agricultural economist. Christoph Gornott, an agricultural economist. So Dr. Christoph is the leader of the working group, Adaptation in Agricultural Systems at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. His research expertise and interests lie on the impacts of climate change by using and comparing different models. Dr. Christoph holds a PhD in agricultural economics. So whilst I hand over to Dr. Christoph, I'd like to encourage you, the audience, to ask questions through the Q&A area so that you'll see it on your dashboard. And Dr. Christoph will only be too happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, over to you, Dr. Christoph.
Thank you very much. So let me just share my screen. Give me a second, and then can immediately share my screen. Give me a second, and then can immediately start. To share with us what we did in the last couple of months or even years together with Oasis Hub, but also together with several partners from the insurance industry. But in the next 20 minutes, I will give you a brief overview about our work and our collaborations with several partners. And yeah, thank you again from being here, and looking then forward also to answer your questions. So as I already said, we are working at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. It's based in Potsdam, Germany. And we are a research institute dealing with crucial questions about climate change in every direction and every sector, like the transport sector, agriculture, water, health, energy, and so on. And as I already said, I'm leading the working group on adaptation in agricultural systems. So we have here a lot of researchers coming from natural and social science, working together to answer these kind of questions. And our working group in particular is focusing on insurances and as one aspect of adaptation. So, doesn't work anymore. Problems to change the slides here. Just give me a second.
Okay, no problem. Take your time. Technology, eh?
Try again, yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, and I think when we turn to the question of insurances, in particular when we look at the developing world, then it's often crop insurances are smallholder or farmers' incomes, but I think it's also beyond more, in particular in the developing world. And there we also, insurances could fulfill the role of giving more information or providing security with respect to food security, and providing security with respect to food security and with health aspects, and also indemnifying livelihoods. I think this is also important to mention. And yeah, as I already said, I think these insurance schemes have the potential also to secure vulnerable people in these countries which are highly affected by climate risks and by extreme weather events. And since food security and the security of livelihoods play a so important role, insurances are in many developing countries are seen as very important. Also important to mention that there are also some challenges which should be faced. And I think here it's necessary also to mention that we are normally dealing with systematic risk. So this is not only a single country which is then likely affected by a drought, or country which is then likely affected by a drought or similar things, but often it's entire Eastern Africa, for instance, or even bigger areas. And then it has also some problems when it comes to working sharing schemes, but I come to this in a minute. We also have always the question about affordability for the farmers, and also if the government should pay subsidies and how this should be designed. And finally, there's also an important aspect with respect to available data and available information when we look at the weather-related risks, which should be covered by the insurance. But when we talk about crop yields, it's not only about the weather-related risk, but also the management policy and so on. And of course, the insurance should only cover the weather-related risks, which makes it a bit difficult, because when you have information about crop yield variability, you have all the factors included. And by designing a crop insurance scheme, or designing a crop addressed, and I think spatial basis risk, and which is then the goodness of the insurance index. And I think here we learn a lot from the scientific improvements in the last couple of years, and making these kind of indexes better. So, and this brings me directly to the model we use, because this has it's designed to contribute an improved insurance index. So a few words, a bit technical on the model, which we developed here at PIK, and this is called Amplify. And these kind of models use crop yield data are necessary from the past, and then also for the past and also for future periods. We work with weather data, we work with remote sensing data from satellites from the past, of course, and also with information on the economy, or in general on the economic management. I think this is the key drivers of crop yield variability, and all these kind of informations are included in the model. And of course, then it's the growing season is very important. So we select only the weather information and the remote sensing satellite information from over the growing season, which are then added in the model and transformed. And the model itself gives us some response on a crop yield loss or an average year. And I think this is what you can learn here, because often when you look at these specific weather indices, also widely used for insurance schemes, then the question is always, if you have only a precipitation index, how much can you learn from this single index, which is related to precipitation or to similar variables, and how close is this linked with crop yield in the end. And I think recent scientific development, it turned out that, of course, there's a large gap between the weather and the crop yields. Of course, there's a large gap between the weather and the crop yields. Of course, it influences the crop yield, but it's not the only factor. So this is why we thought, okay, we need a bit more complex a model to come out with an index which is then covering the yield and not only covering the weather conditions. So, and this is what the results we gain from Tanzania here on district level, and you can see with this map, this is the results from the crop model. And yeah, see that in most of the regions it's a very high correlation between the observed yields and the model yield in the past years. And of course, this is only the average over time. And when you also look at the time series, just pick one randomly, you can also see that here you have the black line with the observed yield, and then the model yield, which is the green line, and also running the model without giving it the information of the crop yield in a out of sample cross validation, which you can see here in the blue line. You can see also that the coverage from year to year of the model is quite high. So I think this is already discussed in my introductional statement. It's also important to say, okay, this is the entire variability explained by the model, coming from various sources like the weather source, the remote sensing, and also the management. But the question, much of this variability is then caused by the by weather and extreme weather events, and this is what you can see here in the next map. So we tried to figure out what is the share of weather and what is the share of management, and here it turned out that only 1/3, approximately over entire Tanzania, of the year-to-year variability is attributable to weather. This differs from region to region. Of course, when you look at the north of Tanzania, where you have semi-arid conditions, so a bit drier conditions, then weather plays a more important role, in particular also precipitation. But in the southern region from Tanzania, where you have precipitation amounts higher than sometimes the growing season, and yeah, it's likely to assume also that weather doesn't play so big role. And I think this is a very important lesson learned, because this has also some effects on the costs of insurance premiums. And by knowing that, okay, in some regions the weather doesn't play so big role, but you still have a high year-to-year variability, but not everything is covered by the insurance, would make the insurance scheme in the end more affordable for smallholder farmers, or in general more affordable, because not the entire variability and not all the losses are priced in these insurance premiums. So I think this is from the scientific point of view, and we are providing the information about crop yield losses. We're designing these indexes and contributing them also as a service, but we don't sell insurances itself, of course. And therefore we are working together in a network, which you can see on the left-hand side, with reinsurance play a big role, but also governments and international organizations, and often also intermediaries which have access to smallholder farmers. We as PIK, we mainly work together with the big reinsurance company Munich Re, together with the big reinsurance company Munich Re, and I think they have a high interest in Eastern Africa, but also in other regions. I'll come to this in a minute. And I think we also got a lot of feedback from them with respect to the design of themes and also indexes and how we can make our model assessments better. So I think this is also important to mention that there are a lot of actors needed from the insurance industry, reinsurance, local insurance, and the loss assessments, which could come from independent loss assessment corporations and so on, also play an important role. So to make this a bit more specific, yeah, we are working together with Munich Re since 3 years almost, a bit more, and are identified our consortium as a world-leading supplier for loss assessments. Based on this, we had a pilot study in Tanzania where we just saw the results. But currently, we are also providing this kind of loss assessment for India, which has already a much bigger market for these kind of micro or crop insurances. And the Munich Re in Mumbai already uses the information we're providing for their day-to-day work for insurance schemes. So I think this is also that we can have this scientific work as a service. So we are also working with several other small insurance brokers and insurance companies in Eastern Africa, ACAR, Pula, also with the African risk capacity, not directly working in Tanzania, but in many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And also we are trying to evaluate Saharan Africa, and also we are trying to evaluate insurance schemes around the world, but also mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, also together with the GIZ, not only focusing on insurance schemes, but also focusing on other adaptation options. And I think insurance schemes, but also focusing on other adaptation options. And I think this is also an important, or we also gained there important lessons that where these indexes and where these insurance schemes work and where there are maybe other adaptation measures could be also more useful. The last climate conferences, and also with strong collaboration with Insur Resilience, the initiative from the German Ministry of Development Corporations. But also we saw, okay, this work should be, we should also bring this, but also we saw, okay, this work should be, we should also bring this work to smallholder farmers, and there we designed an episode which is broadcasted in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, and has reached then in the end 8 million viewers. I think this is an incredible amount of viewers. I think this is an incredible amount of farmers or viewers. They have come across with this issue of climate change and insurances, and I think this is also quite important to raise awareness. And I think this is also quite important to raise awareness to this important issue. So I think with these words, I would like to close my presentation, and I'm happy to hear your questions and thought about it. Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Audience, to ask through the Q&A area. So first question, what are the roles of insurance companies, governments, development corporations, and science?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think this, as already mentioned in my presentation, I think this is very important that, just to underline that we need all these actors to implement such insurance schemes. So I think that the government should give the environment in the end. Then there's a lot of evaluation of the insurance schemes, and then there's a lot of evaluation of the insurance schemes and also implementation on the ground, access to different associations, farmer associations, NGOs, and so on. I think development cooperation can play a very important role. This is also what we are already doing in Ghana. But also it's important to say that, of course, without a risk taker, a reinsurance company, but also a local insurance company, this there will be no implementation of an insurance scheme. And I think also we need to work close these gaps of the areas which are still there to make this, or to create a successful implementation. And of course, lastly, also science could contribute information about evaluation of insurance schemes, but also with respect to the design of evaluation of insurance schemes, but also with respect to the design of index insurances itself.
Okay. I just had one come through there, which is probably relevant to your answer. Which other adaptation measures were you referring to?
So I think we are working with many different interaction measures. So of course, I gave you the example that, of course, when we work, for instance, with the Munich Re in India, then it's really there's a data flow that PIK is constantly running these kind of crop models, and we are providing several times in the growing season information about potential crop yield losses and some kind of forecasts. So I think this could also help. So raising awareness together within workshops, in trainings also, to bring this kind of information and bring knowledge also to different levels on the governmental side, but also bringing knowledge to smallholder farmers on the governmental side, but also bringing knowledge to smallholder farmers. And I think all these steps are needed.
Okay, cool.
And we are, as you have seen, working on these issues.
Another question: how can adequate yield loss assessment contribute to sustainable development?
Well, this is a very good question, and I think also a very broad topic. So I think with the changes of the climate system, we see that cost adaptation options, also with respect to economic management, for instance, have a large potential to fulfill their role, but certainly there is some share of the risks which smallholder farmers face, which could not be reduced by designing very good adaptation options. And there, I think insurances are needed to fill this gap of the risks which could not be reduced by adaptation options. So everything what is the share of risk which should be translated is the share of risk which should be translated to other sectors could be covered by insurance schemes.
Okay, thank you. So another one got to come in. How can index insurances be designed in a
also a very important question, and I think this links also to the point I made in one of my first slides, that of course there's this big problem of moral hazards, so that farmers behave in another way when they have, and here it is very crucial to design this kind of index so that it doesn't reduce the effects of adaptation, or doesn't force the wrong behavior of the farmer. Just give you an example. If, for instance, also the application of fertilizer is covered by the insurance, so the variability which is caused by fertilizer, likely then the farmer would immediately stop to fertilize the plants because the insurance will pay anyhow. So which are related to weather, of course, also related then to pests and diseases, which are an effect of the weather conditions, but doesn't cover any management aspects, and then the incentive for farmers would be still high to invest in such adaptation options, because they will be better off having the adaptation option, plus in case of a loss in the entire district, also the claims from the insurance.
Okay, thank you. So another one got to come in. How can index insurances be designed in a way that encourages adaptation?
Yeah, also a very important question, and I think this links also to the point I made in one of my first slides. Of course, there's this big problem of moral hazards, so that farmers behave in another way when they have coverage by an insurance. And here it is very crucial to design this kind of index so that it doesn't reduce the effects of adaptation, or doesn't force a wrong behavior of the farmer. Just give you an example. If, for instance, also the application of fertilizer is covered by the insurance, so the variability which is caused by fertilizer, likely then the farmer would immediately stop to fertilize the plants, because the insurance will pay anyhow. So I think we should really focus on an index which purely covers the risks which are related to weather, of course also related then to pest diseases, which are an effect of the weather conditions, but doesn't cover any management aspects. And then the incentive for farmers would be still high to invest in such adaptation options, because they will be better off having the adaptation option, plus in case of a loss in the entire district, also the claims from the insurance.
Okay, thank you. So another one in from the audience. What's your rationale behind choosing yield over weather index?
Well, I think I gave you the example for Tanzania, and showing that in particular for southern Tanzania, we have a really high amounts of precipitation in the growing season. And this was not part of my slides, but we also made an analysis which compared an yield index in comparison to the precipitation index, and it turned out, of course, and it's really scarce, the precipitation and the weather index in general could have a high correlation with the crop here, but in many regions where there are so many factors, including management, the correlation is not very high. And so we thought, okay, if we would create or use an index which doesn't cover the actual conditions in the field, I think such an insurance scheme will not hold very long, because the farmers would be frustrated, because in years of low yields they will no compensation, and in years of high yields they will get a compensation. And I think this is definitively the worst thing you can do, implementing an insurance scheme in a region which doesn't cover the actual conditions. And so we thought, okay, this is very crucial, also, yeah, covering these aspects of moral hazards and good coverage of the actual conditions in the field.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So another question is, what is the benefit of insurances in comparison to traditional risk-sharing schemes?
Well, I think when we traditional risk-sharing schemes, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, the issue is that often they work on a village level, or maybe a bit broader, but as already said, I think particular weather effects like droughts, or the like the drought which has hit Eastern Africa, but from El Nino in 3 years ago. I think this has affected from Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, all countries, and I think there a traditional risk sharing scheme on a village level is not able to deal with these big systematic risks, and I think there the insurance schemes could help. That also in years where all communities and all farmers in the country or even in transnational are affected, and will get in compensation and have the possibility to invest again in new farm techniques or replant if the rain comes late. This is a big advantage when we talk about systematic risks. The insurance schemes could have high potential.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And I think that's the end of the questions so far. So just before I let Dr. Christoph go and we finish off, I'd just like to, while I have your attention, audience, I'd like to take a few more minutes of your time just to tell you about the fourth webinar and to remind you about the importance of Oasis Hub, which is truly a unique and very special global window to free and commercial environmental and catastrophe risk data, tools and services. So I'm not sure if the audience is aware, but we here at Oasis Hub have approximately 1,500 global industry professionals and academic members, providing them with a community and infrastructure to explore, discover, and connect with other organizations and fellow professionals like Dr. Christoph and the other people and the panel of experts who've come on and kindly given their time for this webinar series. But it's important as well to highlight that when data, services and tools are purchased by Oasis Hub, everything is reinvested back into the running of the hub, ensuring it prospers on behalf of our community, your community, and we can continue to offer webinars and of course the expertise of Dr. Christoph and his colleagues and so on and so forth. So membership is free. So if you're not a member, so I know that we have lots of members who have joined and participated and have been part of the audience within these webinars, but we also, gratefully, thankfully, we have other people who are not yet members. So please become one, and do also encourage friends and colleagues within the industry to join as well. To finalize, just to tell you about webinar number 4 in the series of 6, and it's on Thursday the 5th of November, which is on 11 a.m. GMT, so that's 12 o'clock Central European time. So it'll be about 30-35 minutes, and the topic for the fourth one is new ways to understand climate risk and reduce health impacts for people with chronic diseases. A case study with COPD patients and potential protection strategies. So again, another fascinating insight to lots of other people's work. So I will follow up with, we had another question come in, Dr. Christoph. Is it okay if you take it?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay, all right, okay. How can you distinguish between weather and management as it is strongly linked? For instance, the timing of planting is a management decision, but what the effect of weather is also depends on timing.
Yeah, very good question. Thank you very much. And I think, yeah, you're fully right that we have some effects which are clearly linked to weather when we talk about precipitation effect of grain yields, then it's clearly weather, and of course there are some effects which are clearly management, for instance, fertilizer application and so on. But of course, there are some aspects which are in between these aspects. For instance, you mentioned the planting, harvesting dates, and so on. So I think here we really stick to the growing season. Rather put this, of course, this is considered more as a weather effect, but of course it's also a decision of the farmer. So in the end, in more cases, a gray zone where you cannot fully say, okay, this is weather and this is management. Another example would be, of course, pest and diseases, which are normally influenced by weather conditions, but of course also controlled in the field by the farmers. So I think here we still need some research, but I think it's also the possibility that we have the flexibility to say, okay, we have here effects which contribute to both aspects, and it's then also some kind of decision of the insurance company to say, okay, we want to have this covered, because there are also insurance schemes in particular covering the if the early rains come or not, and if planting is successful or not. But it could be also a decision of the insurance scheme or the insurance company itself saying, oh, well, this is we're closer to management. We put this out of the scheme. I think the models have the possibility to control for such effects as long as information, fertilizer, planting dates, and so on are available. I think this is also an important aspect that and data availability, we didn't talk about it, but could fill another webinar, is very crucial in particular in developing countries.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of the questions. So everybody, I will follow up with a recording of today's webinar. It will also have the contact details for Dr. Christoph, if you want to contact him directly, as well as my own details. If you need to ask any questions, any further questions about Oasis Hub, I'd only be delighted to help. Many thanks, everybody, and have a lovely rest of the day. And Dr. Christoph, thank you so much. Such an insightful presentation and learning about your work at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. I certainly had a great time. Yeah. Oh, and we have lots of audience participation thanking you as well through the live chat. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.